Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 15 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So as always, we'll start with those key press conference updates as of Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. And really, there weren't as many as normal, but I guess we're not really waiting on many players. We have a lot of benching decisions to make around rotation and expected minutes. But based on injuries, I don't think there are quite as many that we're waiting for. And in all honesty, it's getting worse and worse with the managers now. That it started off with maybe just Arteta and Eddie Howe that we didn't trust. Now Pep is getting even more vague. And it just feels like a lot of managers don't really give us reliable information anyway. So I'm not saying press conference updates are completely useless, but they definitely have less utility than they used to. But let's start with the big one, which is, of course, Gabriel. Sky Sports reported that both Gabriel and Calafiori were absent from Arsenal training, but importantly, they added that they were both training indoors instead. Now, why were they training indoors? Maybe it was because it was raining, but I doubt it. It's obviously because they're not ready for full training, or, once again, it's just Arteta playing mind games. And we have now seen enough information to suggest that he literally is hiding players at the start of training sessions from the media. We saw this with Bukayo Saka recently as well. So I'm not necessarily massively trusting that. On Arteta, he said, until we see something in tomorrow's training sessions, it is very difficult to say something about Gabriel and also Calafiori as well. But on Wednesday, he did say that Sunday is going to be a possibility. I'll be honest, I have no idea. And this isn't the case of every single player, but especially for just players that play for Arsenal with Arteta, we're just never going to have any idea, because it used to be like you do the opposite of what Arteta says. If he says a player's fit, they're injured, but now he's almost going back and forth on it. The mind games are unbelievable. So my opinion on this is that, yes, this would slightly put me off buying Gabriel this week, but at the same time, he's so elite. And we saw Arsenal score 2 corners in the absence of Gabriel. They had so many corners in that game. They're literally celebrating corners before the corner's even taken. So, yes, this would put me off buying Gabriel. We'll talk about Arsenal and Liverpool defenders a little bit later. This would probably make me want to go out and buy one of the other ones instead. But that could be really costly. If you own Gabriel, you absolutely start him. You don't bench him and you don't sell him. Even if I knew that he was out for this game, I would still absolutely keep him in my team. So, someone said this is becoming one of my catchphrases. It feels a bit like don't buy, don't sell, don't bench. You basically, if you own him, you start him, and otherwise, you maybe look elsewhere with your transfers at the moment. And I'm very sorry that I don't have a better update, but this is just the case with Arsenal. Maybe we do get something on Friday evening going into Saturday morning. On Liverpool, who, by the way, are the early kickoff, remember? So we might get some early team news around Liverpool, who are a team that we often do get team news for. Slot said that Alisson will be ready very soon, but did confirm that Kelleher will be in goal for Game Week 15. Arne Slot is a manager that actually does give us reliable information. He said that Jota and Chiesa are both nearing a return as well. So if you were looking at someone like Diaz or Gakpo, this would probably put me off with Jota and Chiesa coming back very soon. And then Konate, Bradley and Tsimikas are longer term issues, and there's no specific time frame on top of what we already know about those assets. So the likes of Gomez, Trent and Robertson probably will have very good minutes. We do know that they have Quansah, who can play centre-back, pushing Gomez into right-back. He could play centre-back, pushing Gomez into left-back, or he can play at right-back himself. So we've seen all of that. But I still think the 3 of those that I mentioned, Gomez, Robertson and Trent, will have better minutes until some of these players start to return. So yeah, I'd be pretty happy going out there and buying Liverpool defenders this week. On Man City, Pep, like I said, is getting even more vague. I think it's because he's in a bad mood at the moment. But he has ruled out Foden, Ake, Stones and Kovacic. So at least some definitive info there. On Foden, he just literally said he is not ready. Didn't provide an update on the time frame. So we don't know much on Foden. If you're still hanging on to Foden at this stage, just get rid of him. He's so expensive for what he offers. If you want to go to De Bruyne, by all means go for it. I would probably just look at getting Saka, Salah, Palmer. And then outside of that, downgrade the midfield a little bit and spread the funds. There are so many good premium defenders. And the forwards, like Watkins, Jackson, Isak, all look really good as well. So yeah, this is just remove Foden if you still have him. On Akanji, Pep said we will see. The reason I bring up Akanji is he's obviously a player that can play centre-back or right-back, and that might affect Rico Lewis's minutes in terms of the number of positions that are available for him to play. So Akanji is a bit of a touch and go as to whether he'll play or not. On Spurs, Davies has injured his hamstring, and he now joins the injured Vicario, Richarlison, Odegaard, Van der Ven, Bentancur, and more. Spurs are in a really bad patch at the moment, other than, of course, that 4-0 against Man City, and the injuries aren't helping them. Romero apparently could return, and Postecoglou said that he is set to train today, which is Friday. If Romero, ordinarily I would say there's no way they risk Romero coming back from an injury and just put him straight back in the 11 if he's touch and go. But given that Davies is also injured, what is their alternative option? I actually don't know at this stage. Is it playing someone like Udogie at centre-back? Or Jed Spence? Or Archie Gray? They've really not got many options there. So I think if Romero is at all fit and available to play this, he probably gets 60 to 70 minutes. And they maybe hope that at that point they can bring him off and that they're not losing and potentially even leading that game. But yeah, Spurs are not in a good spot. And if you own Chelsea assets, it's looking very good for you, especially the likes of Jackson and Palmer. On Chelsea, Fofana and James are still out. So they're out, I think, for expected Fofana's at least another 3 or 4 weeks. James, I don't know if he'll ever return to full fitness, which is really sad to say. And also in the Chelsea press conference, Maresca confirmed that Robert Sanchez is number one. That was his exact wording. So Sanchez will be coming back in for Gameweek 15. If you own Sanchez, or if you bought him last week, because he was actually the most bought goalkeeper for Gameweek 14, then he's absolutely fine. He's going to be the number one. This does show us, though, that for midweek games moving forward, and there is another one in December, then yes, we might get a Jorgensen start. So that's something you have to prepare for, and it might mean that you need a backup goalkeeper. So fingers crossed the likes of Fabianski does keep his place. The only other big press conference update was maybe on Newcastle, because I know Gordon is very high in demand. We'll talk about Gordon a little bit later. Gordon and Tonali should be okay. They did both pick up sort of minor issues towards the end of the game, and they were hobbling, but apparently they're both fine. Not that Eddie Howe would tell us anyway, but yeah, Gordon and Tonali should be okay, and a late call will be made on Trippier, who at the moment obviously isn't in the 11. So there we go. Those are the major updates. Gabriel was really the only one that people were desperate for, and we knew we weren't going to get anything. So like I said, it's up to you. Do what you think. I'm going to keep him. I'm going to start him. But yes, it probably would marginally put me off buying him. So as a lot of you guys will know, I'm very big into Sorare, which is basically fantasy football where you buy and own cards and then you can play them in different competitions every week. But the prizes are absolutely insane in comparison to something like FPL. So I just thought I'd show you how my teams are getting on and the teams that I'm entering at the moment. And as you can see, this is my best reward for a little while. My middle team got 420 points, which was actually 29th in the Premier League competition, which gives me a tier 3 card and a 3-star box, which can include essence to craft more cards, or it can include a card itself. If I just click on the tier 3 options that you can get, I'm probably gonna have to zoom in to show you this. There we go. There are lots of really, really good players that can get as a tier 3. So the likes of Yuri and Timber would be brilliant right now. Diogo Dalot, I've already got one, but it would be an in-season card. Anthony Robinson, the same again. Jorginho Ruta with the fixtures that Brighton have got coming up. So really good options. I'm very excited to open that, and I will probably post on Twitter once I get the card. Hopefully it's something pretty decent. If I just then show you what my teams are looking like for the upcoming week, which is the deadline is at the time we're recording this in a few hours, the teams are looking pretty good once again, and I'm very excited with Amorim coming in because I've got a lot of Manchester United cards, as you can imagine. I bought lots of them because I want to invest in my team. But here is a little tip for you if you are just starting out on Sorare. Maybe you've bought a few cards and you want to build a lineup. What you want to do in Sorare is own lots of players from a single team ideally, because you get a bonus if you own them. But also, if the team that you own a lot of cards from does well, let's say they win 4-0 and you've put all 5 of them in a single lineup, then you're very likely to get a good score. But because so many people own stacks from teams, like lots of people will enter 5 Man United players or 5 Arsenal players, my recommendation is to enter 4 players from one team, as I've done here with Onana, Dalot, Fernandes, and Mainu, and then just put one extra player in that you think has a good fixture that you think could do well, which for me this week is Isak against Brentford. So I'm basically backing United to hopefully do well against Forest, and then I've just chucked a cheeky Isak in there as well, and that would be my recommendation. So at the moment, in terms of the competitions that I'm entering and enjoying, it's the Premier League, and then I'm also very much into the under-23s as well. So if I scroll down, I like this because it requires me to do research around the best players that are playing in European football in the under-23 competitions. And the best player for me has been Esposito, has been unreal. He just scores and gets assists pretty much every week. So yeah, that's my current strategy. But there are also free-to-play competitions if you don't want to spend money straight away. So if you do want to enter those free-to-play competitions to get you started, on the homepage, all you need to do is navigate towards the Best of Europe tab at the top. And then they'll have free-to-play competitions every Tuesday and Friday. So if you miss the Friday deadline, just simply enter for next Tuesday. And there are really good prizes. And like I said, you don't have to spend a single penny. So you can see that my current lineup for the upcoming one is obviously Haaland, because I don't own him in FPL, Watkins, because I don't own him in FPL, Bruno, because I also don't own him, and David Raya. I like to hedge my bets normally away from the players I own in FPL. You can see here I do have a gold card, which is Igor, a player that I own myself. You don't have to enter a gold card, a limited one, but they do give you a 20% bonus. So if you just buy a single card and then play 4 that you don't have to own or buy, then that will give you a pretty big bonus. So as long as Igor starts, if he does well against Leicester and hopefully keeps a clean sheet, then he'll get me some points. So yeah, there's so much to do on Sorare. There is a link down below in the description. It is 18 plus, so please play responsibly. But use the link down below. It supports me. I really enjoy it. I play it every week, and it's just something a bit different to FPL. I'm always super hesitant making graphics and big sections around benching decisions, because every week I will get some of them horribly wrong. I'll get a lot of them right, and then people will ignore those and focus on the ones I get wrong. But I'll give you an example, because I'm happy to hold my hands up. A few weeks ago, I was like, do you know what? I wouldn't mind benching Cunha. That was the week Cunha got 16 points, because I looked at it and thought, I can't see Wolves scoring many goals against Fulham. They're very good defensively. And what did they do? They scored 4, and Cunha absolutely smashed it. So these are decisions that I honestly do truly believe that the best way to do this is to trust your gut feeling. Because in a single given week, luck and variance just happens. Like, we see results that we don't expect. Like Solanke's 16-pointer against Villa, Cunha's 16-pointer against Fulham. You might have thought they were decent assets, but no one saw these massive scores coming. I started Isak against Liverpool this week. Everyone was telling me not to do it, and he comes away with an 11-pointer, and he's my third top scoring attacker, my best attacker outside the premium. So I guess what I'm saying is it's incredibly difficult for these benching decisions. Cut yourself some slack as well. So trust your gut feeling. Pick the players that you enjoy owning and that you just think will do well this week. And if it doesn't go well, you've just got to own that decision and accept that trying to predict the future is incredibly difficult. That being said, because so many people have so many benching headaches this week, I have, based on my own opinion, data, eye test, gut feeling, put together from start to bench the attackers and who I would most likely want in my team this week. So obviously, if they're towards the top of this list, I would start them, and if they're at the bottom of the list, I would bench them. It obviously doesn't mean that the likes of Iwobi, Solanke, Smith Rowe aren't good. It's just based on fixtures and the way the teams are performing and the way I see the games going, I wouldn't have them towards the top of my list. So I would say Watkins, Isak, Jackson, the 3 most expensive forwards outside Haaland, yes, I would want them in my starting 11, and I think they all have really good fixtures this week for them. I look at the matchups for each and every one of them, and they're fantastic. So I wouldn't be benching those. And what I often base my benching decisions around, and not always, by the way, as you'll see in a second, but I think about minutes, I think about the fixture, I think about the matchup, and also routes to points. And I always use this term, routes to points, and it just means if a player has loads of creativity, but they're not a goal threat, they're not on penalties, and they don't take corners, well then, yeah, they've got that creativity, like Dwight McNeil, although he does take set pieces. His main route to points, is just like assists, mainly from open play, maybe the odd set piece. Whereas someone like Cunha is not only a 90-minute man, but he's on penalties, he takes corners, some direct free kicks, he's got goal threat from open play, and assist threat from open play. Cunha, I would say, has got like 4 or 5 routes to points that you could see him pick up points in any regard in a given game, and I love that about him. So when players are on set pieces, when players are on penalties, and when they have good minutes, they're always good options in my book. It's why I'm very hesitant to have Mbeumo as low as he is, which I'll discuss in a second. But yeah, for that reason, João Pedro and Cunha are very high up because their projected minutes are usually quite good. They're on penalties for their teams. They're very talismanic. Obviously, Cunha takes set pieces too, so I would absolutely have them towards the top. Jarrod Bowen, a great option this week, as is Kai Havertz, despite the tricky fixture, because Arsenal are a fantastic attack. Now, where we start to get into the more interesting decisions, the ones where I think a lot of people are genuinely struggling this week, is probably 3 players. It's Rodgers, Semenyo, and Mbeumo. Some people are keeping Mbeumo this week and they've got one of Rodgers and Semenyo and they want to choose. I know a lot of people, myself included, as I'll discuss at the end of the video, are looking at selling Mbeumo for Semenyo, but then that gives you a benching headache between Rodgers and Semenyo. I think the first thing you need to decide is how bad do you think Mbeumo is as an asset? Because if you are taking him historically, across his time in the Premier League, and even across this season, the man gets returns, right? He is very, very consistent for his returns. He's had pretty decent underlying data now for 2 seasons. Mbeumo is just a good FPL asset over a long sample size, but he has taken 1 shot in 5 games. So what you need to decide yourself is how bad of an asset is Bryan Mbeumo. Because if you think that the last 5 games, they don't worry you that much, he's still the same Mbeumo, then I would start him ahead of Rodgers and Semenyo. But for me, I am worried about those 5 games. He's not only not taking shots, he's just not really involved in the final action. He's almost playing like a right wing back at points. I also think that Newcastle have defended fairly well recently. And despite the fact that we know that Brentford are better at home, I'm just not a massive fan of this fixture for him, and I'm not a massive fan of the way that he's playing at the moment. Whereas obviously Semenyo and Rodgers have really good fixtures this week, and if you expect them both to play decent minutes, I just fancy the upside of them. However, neither of them are on set pieces. I don't think Semenyo is anyway, but I don't think either of them are set pieces, and obviously neither of them are on penalties as well. With Mbeumo, he's a penalty taker that also takes corners and some free kicks. So it's going completely against everything that I would ever use in terms of my normal model for making decisions, which is routes to points. So this is where I sometimes contradict myself and I find it a bit difficult, but I'm just using my eye test and the data, and Mbeumo's just not it for me at the moment. So I would have very marginally, and I'm talking like small percentages, I would have Rodgers and Semenyo ahead of Mbeumo. When it comes to Rodgers versus Semenyo, I think the fixture is better for Semenyo. I think that actually Ipswich have been largely quite unlucky in recent games, and I think especially away for Semenyo. I just think that the matchup is better for Rodgers, but Semenyo's minutes are more secure. So if I was to project their minutes, I would put Rodgers at 60 to 65, and I would put Semenyo at 80 to 85. So immediately, you got an extra 20 minutes probably from Semenyo based on my projections. The issue we've got is that a lot of people are predicting a Rodgers benching, because if you look at Aston Villa's fixtures overall, the fixtures coming up for Aston Villa are very difficult. They've got Leipzig away midweek. They don't really have an opportunity to rest Rodgers outside of this Southampton game. So there are 2 ways you look at this. You say that this is the chance to rest Rodgers. They've got players that they can bring in instead. They've got Buendia. They are going to use their best opportunity to rest one of their best players before he picks up an injury or gets burned out. And that is definitely a viable possibility. I could see that happening. The alternative is Aston Villa have won barely any games. What is it, something like 1 in 7 or not even that? Like, they've been on an awful run of games. 3 points is 3 points in the Premier League. And if they pick up those 3 points, the table all of a sudden looks a lot stronger for them. So I wonder if Emery might view this as, yes, it is a game that they might be able to win without Rodgers, but why? Don't risk it. They need to pick up points in the Premier League as soon as possible. For that reason, I think Rodgers will start, and I think in an ideal situation for Emery, they are 2 or 3 goals up around the 60th minute, and at that point, Rodgers will come off. I will eat my cap, hopefully not, if Rodgers gets more than about 70 minutes. So it comes down to how much damage you think he can do in 60 to 70. If you think he'll start, please don't blame me if Rodgers doesn't start, because as I said, that is very possible. Some other options on this list, like Welbeck, and by the way, I saw after I recorded that first section that Welbeck has trained and a late call be made as to his availability, so I'll just add that in there, that Welbeck has trained and that he might be available. But as a result, I do wonder if you've got some of these other options, maybe don't risk it, because Welbeck is a player that they probably don't want to risk themselves. But if he's in full training, maybe he plays. It's very difficult to know based on that. But yeah, let's say that I would put Welbeck a little bit lower as a result. Strand Larsen, you might think, is extremely low based on his recent performances. He's not got the penalties. He's not got the corners. His underlying data still isn't great. And so for that reason, I do prefer a lot of the other options. But maybe I'm just heavily underappreciating how good Strand Larsen is. And maybe similar for Wissa as well. Like, Wissa has been better than Mbeumo in recent weeks. But again, if my model for making decisions usually is around like routes to points as well as the fixture and stuff like that, I don't see this as being a perfect game for Wissa. And obviously Johnson, Solanke, Iwobi, Smith Rowe is just based on the fixture. So hopefully that has been helpful for you. Take it with a massive pinch of salt, because really this is vibes, gut feeling, data, everything merged together. It's just my opinion. And if you asked me in 2 hours, I might change my opinion on some of this. Let me know what your benching headaches are down below, and let me know if you agree with this list. So moving on to another topic, which is a key topic every single game week recently, which is very nice, is captaincy. But unfortunately, based on Salah's recent performances, I do wonder whether this will stop becoming a discussion point for many people very soon, especially if Salah gets double digits against Everton once again. I probably won't discuss captaincy for a while. Not because I don't think there is an opportunity, but it just feels redundant. Like, I ran a poll earlier and we're looking at 70% minimum are captaining Salah. So it's becoming a point now where people are like, why are you even considering anyone else? Why am I considering anyone else? There are lots of like narrative things you can say. Early kickoff on a Saturday. A lot of people don't like that. By the way, where that originates from is betting. So when people put like accumulators on in betting, if the first game you put an accumulator on doesn't come in, well, then you've ruined the bet for the rest of the weekend. But the same sort of thing goes for FPL, right? If you captain Salah and he blanks, you've got the whole weekend emotionally to just sit there and think, oh, I wish I was captaining someone else. In terms of, is there genuinely anything behind it? I haven't done enough research, right? Lots of people say that, yeah, it's because they've got to eat earlier and like they're not fully awake at that point. And obviously we know that there's this thing called a chronotype, like some people are morning people or evening people. And a lot of players do comment on the fact that they don't really like the morning kickoffs. So there is all of these things. And the weather in Liverpool on Saturday, when this game's happening, looks absolutely horrific. And it is the sort of game where if the wind is high and it's raining and it's cold, do we see lots of goals in a game like that? Or might it be more of a 0-0, 1-0, 2-1 sort of game? Like, there are a lot of narratives around this game. And it's a Merseyside derby, which, by the way, they have often been a little bit low scoring. Salah's record, I think, is something like 7 or 8 returns in 11 games, which isn't bad, by the way. But he's definitely got a better record against other teams. So, yeah, there are lots of reasons that you might want to go against him. And if you look at the bookies' odds, he is third on this list for the chance of scoring a goal. So, yes, there are absolutely enough reasons to go against him. But am I fully convinced by anyone else that's an option this week? Like, does anyone else stand out as having great data, great form? The bookies love them. They have a great matchup. Like, there's no one that really stands out as being good enough for me to want to back against Salah. So that's why at the moment the armband is on Salah for me. I actually think the Palmer game is pretty good for him in terms of Spurs have got lots and lots of issues defensively. They're not in a good run of form. I actually think Palmer's been unfortunate in the last 3 not to get more returns. And out of Salah, Palmer, Haaland, in terms of their fixture, you can see here by the opponent XGC rank that Salah and Haaland technically are playing against better defences than Palmer. So Everton this season are 8th for non-penalty expected goals conceded. Spurs are 13th. And then Crystal Palace are 11th. So technically, Spurs is a better game than obviously Everton and Crystal Palace based on the data. So yeah, I really don't mind Palmer. He's got a slightly lower percentage chance of scoring according to the bookies. The only thing is you can see that good positional matchup column there is not the perfect matchup. Like Spurs don't concede, believe it or not, most of their chances through the centre. Although that takes into account a large part of the season where they had Romero and Van de Ven. So I like the Palmer captaincy option a lot. On Haaland, bookies have him as the second most likely to score. His data is comfortably the best on this list if you're just looking at expected goals. So he's definitely the biggest goal threat on this list. And Crystal Palace are sort of a middling defence. I'm just not seeing enough from Haaland. Like it was 0.3 XG against Nottingham Forest. He didn't really get many chances to score. Even when City looked a lot more dominant, Haaland's just still not quite at it. I think Haaland is one of the better captaincy options this week. If you, for some reason, still own him and you're deciding to not sell him and stick it out, then yes, if you want to go through the pain of possibly losing points once again, I don't hate it. I just don't see why you would want to go for Haaland over Salah at the moment, unless you believe in all of the stuff that I said around the narratives of the early kickoff and the Merseyside derby and the weather. Saka, the thing putting me off Saka is the low goal threat. You can see here it's comfortably the lowest on this list, his goal threat. And people think I disrespect Saka. I love him. Like, I brought him in recently. I'm so happy to have him. But his goal threat is low from open play. Like the numbers don't lie. And yes, he might be a fantastic finisher that overperforms his XG. And I spoke about that recently. When he cuts in on his left and scores from the edge of the box, that will be low XG. But for Saka, he's so good at it. So I understand that. But that still doesn't... Like, his data's still not very good. So for me as a data-driven manager, I struggle to look at that XG and want to captain him. But his assist threat is unbelievable. 0.43 expected assist per 90 is comfortably the best in the Premier League. So really like that. Basically, the thing putting me off is I actually really rate Fulham, especially at Craven Cottage. Is not a particularly good game for Saka. They are 5th for expected goals conceded this season. And as much as, by the way, Everton have been very good recently, I rate Fulham even more. So that's the thing putting me off Saka. You have some other options. Obviously, Watkins, Isak, João Pedro, 3 of the forwards. Personally, I prefer captain midfielders. Extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet. So I will always back them there. I also think the premiums are definitely more reliable for returns in terms of like Salah, Palmer, Haaland, Saka. They feel more reliable. But Watkins has the highest percentage chance of scoring this week. He's playing against the worst defence in the league and has the second best XG on this list. And took a penalty, by the way, to my surprise. But the penalty was really badly taken. He did win the penalty as well, which might have been the reason he took it. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't take the next one. And also, I do worry about his minutes. Like I said with Rodgers, like going into this busy period, could we potentially see a bit more rotation for Watkins? Absolutely. So I would just be very happy owning Watkins. I wouldn't necessarily want to give him the armband. I kind of feel the same about Isak. I like his data. I like the matchup. The bookies have him as a decent chance of scoring. But I'm pretty happy just owning him. I don't feel the need to give him the armband as well. And João Pedro, I just worry about his minutes. I think he will start. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets reduced minutes. He's not going to play like insanely high minutes, 3 games in the space of about a week. Also, I just think some of these other options are just better FPL assets. Like, once again, I'm very happy just owning João Pedro. So for me, very, very boring. Every week from now until when I potentially look to buy Erling Haaland, I'm going to be captaining Salah or Palmer because I trust them. They are elite assets with consistently good output on penalties, on some set pieces for Palmer, with so many routes to points. They are just the best assets in FPL, and that's why they're priced the way they are. So I'll be choosing between Salah and Palmer. I'm probably like 70% Salah, just because why would you bet against him at the moment? I just don't. I would want to see a drop-off before I then start betting against him. And maybe that's a bit risk-averse, but I have captained someone other than Salah twice in the last 5 weeks, and Salah scored 14 and 18 in those 2 weeks. I'm just being left with an egg on my face anytime I bet against him. So yeah, I would have it as probably Salah top, Palmer and Haaland honestly level. Like I think they're very, very close. Then I would probably have Saka and Watkins, and then after that, it probably is Isak and João Pedro. So probably something similar to the order on this list. So I'm getting a lot of questions this week around Arsenal and Liverpool defence, and firstly, rightly so, but especially if you're like you're selling Mbeumo and you're downgrading, you've got all of the funds available. It is actually a bit of a discussion around, do you go for an Arsenal defender or do you go for a Liverpool defender? And then even once you've made that decision, there are lots of options. Like with Arsenal, you've got Gabriel, Saliba, Raya if you include goalkeepers, and obviously Timber. And with Liverpool, Trent and Van Dijk obviously stand out, but then you've got Robertson at a slightly cheaper price. You've got Joe Gomez. So this is honestly, considering you're just choosing a player from a couple of teams, it's quite difficult at the moment. And I will just say, I am in the position myself. At the end of the video, you'll have my little team selection part where I'll talk about what I'm likely to do. But I also have my own biases around players and directions I want to go with my team. So I'll try to remove all of that when I do this section. I will just say, in an ideal world, if I was on a wildcard this week, or if I was suggesting the ideal structure moving forward, I think you want to own, I mean, ideally it would be 4, but let's say I think based on everything else, in an ideal world, you own 3 defenders from Arsenal and Liverpool. Whether that be a double up on Arsenal and single on Liverpool, or a double on Liverpool and a single on Arsenal, I don't think it really matters too much, because I think what you're looking at right now are going to be the 2 best defences at the end of the season. I feel like we've seen enough from them now. Both of them have played some tricky games and they're getting clean sheets and the underlying data is strong. I think we've seen enough now to say that these are probably the 2 best defences in the league this season. So whether you go for 2 from one or 2 from the other, it probably, hopefully, doesn't matter too much. Something that you do need to consider is which team are you more likely to want to own 2 attackers from? And actually, I think the answer to that is probably neither desperately. When I look at Liverpool, unless they get multiple injuries, in which case the likes of someone like a Gakpo become fully nailed, it really is only Salah that I want in the attack. And then when I look at Arsenal, do I really want anyone outside of Saka? Probably not. So you're probably not blocking a 3rd slot, but that is something that you potentially want to consider. When we look at the fixtures, pretty much identical. I don't think there's much to separate them at all in terms of clean sheet opportunities. They both have some tricky games in there. For example, Liverpool play against Spurs, although we've seen that teams can keep clean sheets. I think United at that point will hopefully be attacking fairly well. That's not an easy game. For Arsenal, Brentford away it's a game where you would expect Brentford to try and score goals there. Brighton isn't a particularly easy game, but they're obviously a little bit later. Over the next 4, I maybe slightly prefer Arsenal's, maybe just about. But look, over the next 2, they've basically got the same game. Same games. Arsenal has Fulham away, Everton at home. Liverpool, it's Everton away, Fulham at home. They're basically just reversed. So yeah, there's not a lot to separate them in terms of the fixtures. In terms of underlying data this season, I've kept it fairly straightforward. I've just looked at non-penalty expected goals. That shouldn't say per 90. That is just total. So total non-penalty expected goals is 13.4 for Arsenal and 12.4 for Liverpool. This tells me 2 things. Liverpool are, firstly, according to the best piece of data we possibly have for defensive ability, they are the best defence this season. But also, notice how quickly Arsenal have closed that gap. Because only a few game weeks ago, Liverpool are about 4.5 expected goals clear there. So Arsenal have really closed that gap. And that's not necessarily because Liverpool have been defending badly, but Arsenal have just been on a crazy run. So I think this probably suggests, I would say they are very, very close defensively. Something that was interesting to me is when I looked at big chances conceded. Arsenal have only conceded 22 big chances this season. Liverpool have conceded 31. Now, that's not actually a lot for Liverpool, by the way, but it is 9 more than for Arsenal. And I think what this suggests is that, do you remember in those games where Arsenal went down to 10 men? They conceded a lot of shots to the likes of Brighton and Man City. And I wonder if you remove those, you lose a lot of the XG, but they weren't necessarily big chances that they even conceded in the games that they went down to 10 men. They were just conceded lots of shots from in and around the edge of the box. I'm going to upset every Liverpool fan watching this, and it's not... I think Slot has done a remarkable job. He's been my manager of the season so far, and Liverpool have been the best team. I think Arsenal might be the better defence. Still. And we'll see that over the next 5 to 10 game weeks if Arsenal continue to look really good. And we'll see if they start to improve and if they become the best defence based on XG conceded. But I think I might marginally prefer Arsenal. I think a lot of people will be in the same position as me, where you already own Gabriel. So let's say you do already own one Arsenal defender, and you can either bring in another Arsenal defender and ignore Liverpool, or bring in a Liverpool defender, and it means that you still only have one Arsenal defender. I think because there is not much to separate them in terms of fixtures, and there's not much to separate them in terms of the defensive ability of the two teams, I think what it comes down to is the individual asset, so in terms of attacking threat, upside, and minutes, but also what can you do with the funds. So, I'm going to, again, be very selfish and talk about my team because I think it will help you a little bit. I have a choice this week to go for anyone outside of Gabriel. So, Timber, Trent, Van Dijk. When I look at my own team right now, going for Trent or Van Dijk does not block me from future moves. I've tried looking ahead sort of game week 18, 19. Unless I want Haaland back, which, by the way, is a possibility if you start smashing it over the next few, there are no planned moves that I have right now that would require the funds for me to go for Timber instead of Van Dijk or Trent. And at that stage, considering I already have an Arsenal defender and I don't cover what, in my opinion, is one of the top two defences in the league in Liverpool, I am prioritising a Liverpool defender ahead of an Arsenal one. If you are in a position where you own neither, well, then I think that's a lot harder because I do think that Arsenal are fantastic. Even with his flag, Gabriel is, for me, the best defender in the game. So I think that becomes a lot more difficult at that stage. When we're looking at Trent versus Van Dijk will have better minutes. Trent will be probably benched in one of the next 8 to 10 games, maybe 2. But I would expect 1 out of the next 8, Trent doesn't start. My prediction is that Trent will do enough damage in the games that he does start that he will probably still outscore Van Dijk over that period of time. But that is reliant on, firstly, Trent not getting re-injured and starting the amount of games I expect, which is probably about 7 of the next 8. And also, Van Dijk not scoring a few bullet headers, which he has the ability to do. Against City alone, he could have had 3. So, if Trent's benched in 2 of the next 8, and Van Dijk does grab a couple of goals, then it's going to be very difficult for Trent to outscore Van Dijk. So, it comes down to your own expected minutes projections for Trent and for Van Dijk, how much attacking threat you truly believe Trent has, and how much you think Van Dijk might start to get on the score sheet. Because actually, if you look at Van Dijk's attacking threat this season, his data, it's been really low. If you look last season, Van Dijk's attacking threat was really low. He's not had good goal threat now for over 2 seasons in terms of underlying data across the entire season. So we need a little bit more from Van Dijk, I think. For me, if you have the money for Trent, he's worth the risk. But that's the way that I play. I've also got a bit of a bias for Trent. I think he's a fantastic FPL asset, and I always really enjoy owning him. I'm going to leave it there because I feel like I didn't really answer the question. I've further confused everyone. But to sum it up, I think that if you owned no one from these defences and you had all of the money in the world, I still think Gabriel is the best defender in the game to own. The issue is, of course, the flag around him this week, which you need to decide yourself if that puts you off enough. But Gabriel, for me, is still the best defender to own. Once you have Gabriel, I would personally then prioritise either Trent or Van Dijk. And if you can afford Trent, I would go for Trent. If you've then got one of Trent or Van Dijk and Gabriel, the next thing to do after that, for me, would then be go back to the Arsenal defence and go for Timber or Raya. So I think the ideal situation moving forward is to own 2 Arsenal defenders and 1 Liverpool. And for me, the perfect triple up would be Gabriel, Timber and Trent. Hopefully that helps, and hopefully that definitive conclusion helped a little bit as well. I'd love to know where you're looking for sort of Arsenal and Liverpool defence moving forward and how many you're going to own from these 2 teams. I was sat here earlier saying that I'd like to record a slightly shorter video today because I've got a lot going on, and I already know this video is going to be obscenely long, so I'm going to try and keep this section a little bit short, especially because I only discussed it about 3 days ago with a very similar graphic, and this is who are the best Mbeumo replacements. I'm not going to sit here now and try and give all the reasons to keep or sell Mbeumo because I've done that throughout the week. It's up to you with your team. What can you do with the money, and how desperate are you to replace Mbeumo? For me, I want Trent. It's not that I think Mbeumo's bad. It's honestly not that I think Mbeumo will do badly against Newcastle. I just want Trent in my team. And for me, this is a very good entry point into him. And I've got 2 free transfers. So for me, I'm going to be selling Mbeumo this week. And you also need to think about your own team. Do you need the funds? Like Mbeumo to Gordon, as I'll say in a second, I love that. But then it wouldn't give me Trent. So it's not an option for me because I think Trent's better than Gordon as an asset moving forward. So these are the things you need to think about. But yes, my top 3 has changed. There's a little bit of knee-jerk in terms of players coming in and out of this team, but also we are a week later with fixtures. So for me now, Gordon is in first. I actually didn't see loads that I loved specifically about Gordon, but I was pretty impressed with Newcastle. Gordon obviously got on the score sheet, and what I like now is that despite the fact that he got the return against Liverpool, that he's now going into a brilliant fixture run. Like in the next 3, it's Brentford, Leicester, Ipswich. And actually, beyond that, until about Game Week 24, I quite like the fixtures for Newcastle. So for me, Gordon's got the minutes. Gordon's got really decent data. Gordon is very talismanic. He's involved in a large quantity of his team's goals. He can play off the right, centre, or off the left. When Isak's not on the pitch, by the way, assuming Wilson's not on the pitch instead, then Gordon could be on penalties. He's got the best fixtures out of anyone on this list. According to Fantasy Football Hub, the second best fixtures in the league. And so for me, what doesn't Gordon have? Penalties. That's pretty much it. Other than that, and by the way, again, he has them when he isn't on the pitch. He's got everything. So for me, Gordon is top. I still love Mitoma. Mitoma's in second. He's got pretty much everything Gordon has, right? He's got the fixtures, very similar data. He's, again, I think, a very talismanic player, although he's not involved in such a high percentage of Brighton's goals. For me, I just think Gordon is a better asset. I just fancy him more to get returns. And again, I do slightly prefer the fixtures over the next few for Newcastle. I do also wonder, Mitoma's minutes have been an absolute joke this season. Like, considering how much rotation we normally see with Brighton, I do wonder whether Mitoma's rest might come this weekend. And if not this weekend, does he just continue starting every single game? I mean, maybe. But that's the only reason he's not much higher. Or in first, I should say. Semenyo I've got in third still. He did basically play like a right back against Spurs, and that's a slight concern, but I do think it was to track you doggy largely. I think it might have been game dependent there. And you can see his data is almost identical. I mean, look at Gordon, Mitoma, and Semenyo. Their data is separated by 0.01. There's not a lot to discuss here in terms of trying to separate them based on underlying data. And Semenyo's fixtures are almost the same in terms of difficulty with Gordon and Mitoma. I think the 3 of them just stand out to me as being really good value, and I really expect returns for all 3 of them in the upcoming games. Bowen's in fourth, arguably could be higher. I just think unless they sack Lopetegui, I'm just not fully convinced by them at any given moment. But he really should have returned quite big, by the way, in Game Week 14. And maybe if he had, it'd be higher for me. I love how good his minutes are. His underlying data after that really good performance isn't far off the first 3 as well. And his fixtures aren't far off as well. So Bowen, yeah, he's right up there. I guess he's just slightly more expensive. He's the most expensive player on this list. Does he justify that price tag? Maybe, but I'm not sure. I think I slightly prefer the other 3 myself. And then I've got Iwobi in fifth. He's moved up. The reason Iwobi's moved up is not just off the back of his monster haul in Game Week 14. It's also because I've realised he rotates very well with Rodgers and also to some extent Semenyo. And I think a lot of people already have Rodgers and Semenyo. And so if you can add Iwobi to one of them, especially Morgan Rodgers, the rotation is beautiful. So if he rotates, because outside of that, the fixtures are horrible. If you have to play Iwobi every week, do not buy him. But if you can rotate him, I really don't mind him as an asset. And then after the next few games, the fixtures really start to improve for Fulham again. He's got not the best underlying data, but again, it's not that far off the top 4. So I really like Iwobi. Rodgers is still an okay option. I've got no massive issue with him, but I wouldn't put him any higher. Just I think his minutes will drop off slightly. And Kudus, I've just bumped a little bit because actually his underlying data is okay. His minutes, I think, will be okay. 82 minutes per game this season. Maybe slightly more nailed on than I thought. And the thing is, if Lopetegui gets sacked, Kudus is not a player that's going to suddenly miss out with the new manager. He's too good. In fact, his minutes might even improve. You'll notice that for those top 7, the minutes per game for each of them, the lowest is Rodgers with 81. I would not be buying a rotation risk at the moment. It's just not worth the risk for me. And therefore, Madueke, Ruta, Johnson, Buonanotte, Ahmad, and Enzo do not have good enough minutes for me to want to buy them. Obviously, if you need to go super cheap, you can go for Buonanotte, Ahmad, or Enzo. I have no issue with that. I think Buonanotte is parent club tied, so I don't think he can play in this fixture anyway. But they all could offer good value, but you have to be really scraping the barrel here. I'd much rather go for Rodgers or a Wobie if you can afford them at that price. Even Clivert to some extent might be slightly better. So I'll leave it there. That was only 5 minutes, which is pretty good for a section for me. I really like anyone inside that top 7. I have absolutely no issue with. I myself have 6.4 million to replace Mbeumo this week. So we'll take a look in a second who I'm looking at bringing in for Mbeumo. But I don't think you can go massively wrong with any of them. So guys, moving on to my team, I think I have 4 key decisions this week, at least at the time of me recording. And I'll go through those, and I would love your opinion if you can be bothered to help me down below with what you would do. Option number 1? That's not what I mean. What am I? Decision number 1? That's the word I'm looking for. Do I start Sanchez or Fabianski? Nice and easy. I am starting Sanchez at the moment because I don't have any Spurs assets and I have double Wolves. And I know that shouldn't completely dictate my decision, but if I'm expecting Wolves to go big, and I'm hoping that they do, well then Fabianski isn't keeping a clean sheet. And if Fabianski does keep a clean sheet and all my Wolves assets blank, well then that's terrible. But I do fancy just putting all of my eggs in one basket, I think, and just hoping, by the way, could Chelsea keep a clean sheet against Spurs? Well, we've just seen Bournemouth do it, so absolutely. I don't think either keep a clean sheet realistically, but I think I want to back the better defence and the goalkeeper who doesn't clash with my attackers this week. But I'd love to know if you disagree and if you think I should just start Fabianski. The next decision to make is which defender do I sell for Trent? So I'm going to buy Trent this week. I'm almost certain of it. Which defender do I sell? Obviously, it's not going to be Gabriel, and I can't afford to sell Vandenberg. So basically, do I sell Ait-Nouri? Do I sell Rico Lewis? Or do I sell Leif Davis? And then I also will need to start one of them as well. So it's sort of which one do I sell, which one do I start, and which one do I bench? That's Snog, Marry, Avoid, but FPL version. So Lewis, Ait-Nouri, Davis. At the moment, believe it or not, I'm considering selling Leif Davis. And the only reason for that is the fixtures run out. Like after Bournemouth this week, in all honesty, I don't really want to start him against Bournemouth. Wolves away, I've just spoken about, I don't really want the clash there if I'm having Cunha, and I fancy Cunha to do well there. Then I just don't want to start him in any of these. The only green fixture is Brighton at home, which I don't. Maybe Southampton, but that's all the way in Gameweek 24. So I just don't see many opportunities coming up that I'd actually desperately want to start Leif Davis. With Ait-Nouri, it's kind of a similar situation, but I really like 16 and 17. But after that, I don't want Ait-Nouri either. So Ait-Nouri is also an option to sell, but selling ahead of Ipswich and Leicester, as long as he doesn't pick up his 4th yellow card, I think they're good fixtures for him. Rico Lewis, if you'd have asked me like a day ago, I probably would have said, yeah, I'm just going to sell Rico Lewis, and I might still. But if I'm looking at trying to predict the future and foresee what might happen, if they get a couple of injuries, let's say Walker or Gvardiol get injured and Rico Lewis's minutes continue to look really strong, this is a much better run of fixtures that I would be much more eager to play a defender for, even if City aren't looking good. And even with the lack of attacking output from Rico Lewis, this just feels like a better run that I might potentially have some utility for him. So I'm actually considering selling Davis slightly more than Rico Lewis, but I'd love your opinion on that. Maybe I'm discrediting the absolute GOAT Leif Davis. Then after that, I'm looking at selling Mbeumo to obviously fund the move to get Trent in. So who do I sell Mbeumo for? And then do I start them instead of Rodgers? So if I go to transfers, I've got 1.1 million in the bank at the moment. Let's say that I sell Leif Davis rather than Lewis, because that's currently the way that I'm leaning. If I sell Mbeumo, I've got 6.2 million. So if I just sort this up to 6.3, here we go. I could go a Wobie, who, like I said, rotates really well with Rodgers. In Game Week 8, 15 and 16, I would play Rodgers against Southampton and then Nottingham Forest. In 17, he comes in for Southampton at home when Rodgers has City. And then they just rotate fairly well. Like in the most weeks where you would want one of them, one has a good fixture and the other one has a bad one. So it almost reduces the benching headache as well. I couldn't afford Madueke unless I sold Rico Lewis rather than Davis, but I'm not that desperate for him anyway. I'm not that interested in Clivert, Smith Rowe. Semenyo is probably the standout option that I think a lot of people would say, yeah, just go for Semenyo. And in all honesty, I could. It does prove to give me a massive benching headache this week, right? That's the major issue, is you just don't know who to start. But that shouldn't put you off an asset. The issue is they don't rotate particularly well. In 17, City for Morgan Rodgers, and it's Man United for Semenyo. Now, you could just play Semenyo. That's not a huge issue, but the fixtures just don't quite align as well. After that, they're not as bad. Like in 21 and 22 for Chelsea and Newcastle for Semenyo, Rodgers has Everton in the 21, but then Arsenal in 22. It's just not the best rotation. That's the only thing that's putting me off. But then I'm like, rotations don't always work out that way. It's not always the case that all 8 of your attackers are perfectly fit, and each week I'm choosing between Rodgers and Semenyo. I might pick up Doubts, I might pick up Knox, and maybe what I should be doing is just picking who I think is the better asset. I think for me, I probably have narrowed it down to Iwobi or Semenyo. Like, there are some other options, as I spoke about, but I'm just not that interested. So yeah, that's the decision probably, is which one do I go for. Iwobi's data is not quite as good. His minutes have been very secure. Like, I don't think there's any doubt around Iwobi's minutes, which is nice. It's just about sustainability. And also, the next 2 fixtures, if I do get any issues, I don't want to play him in either of those desperately, but then it is a nice run after that. Like, all the way down to about 28. I'd be happy playing him. Maybe I am leaning Iwobi. I don't know. I think Semenyo is probably the better asset, but yeah, just fixture rotation isn't quite as good. The other thing to then think about is also captaincy. I think that's the 4th and final decision, is do I captain Salah or Palmer, but I'm leading Salah at the moment. So I'll leave it there. Start Sanchez over Fabianski. Currently planning to sell Leif Davis and keep Rico Lewis, in which case I would probably bench 8 Nuri this week, by the way, and my back 3 would be Trent, Lewis, Gabriel. If I have enough doubts around Rico Lewis starting this week, maybe I just get rid of him. Maybe it's the reason that I need to just get rid of him. Then do I sell Mbeumo? I'm leaning towards doing it. If so, for Semenyo or Iwobi, and then captaincy. Outside of that, I'm very happy with the team. I love my front 3 for this week. Let me know what your plans are, and yeah, let me know what you think of my plans too. So guys, there we have it. That is the longest deadline decisions video ever, I think, anyway. I'm excited to edit this and see how long it comes out. As if you are still watching at this point, you've watched the whole thing. Thank you so much, by the way. But do make sure that you drop a like on the video and make sure you subscribe as well if you haven't already. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.